So, welcome to our podcast today. This is Carrie Getz, and I have Inge Woudstra here, and we're going to talk about gender diversity and some of the differences that we may or may not realize happen. And so, for the companies that are looking to hire more women and attract more women to the workforce, or even a more diverse workforce, where you've got some pointers and tips and some things to consider. So, Inge, how about introducing yourself?
Oh, hi, Carrie. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. My name is Inge Woudstra. I live in the UK and I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I've been living and working in the UK for the last 14 years. And what I do here is I work in gender diversity as a freelance consultant, mostly with companies in tech and engineering. So what it means is companies come to me and they say, look, we're not getting any CVs from women, Inge. What can we do? We want to be more diverse, but clearly they don't want to work with us. So I help them change their recruitment or look at what they can do to get more women to apply. Often with good results. My latest client wasn't getting any CVs from women. Now 50% of the CVs he's getting are from women. He did say, though, the other day when I spoke with him, he said, well, yeah, but it does take sustained effort. It's not like once you've implemented these changes, you're done. He says we need to continually work on it. I also work with companies that do recruit enough women, but they just feel women aren't staying or they're not advancing at the same rate as men. So really helping these companies find out, like running focus groups, doing exit interviews, find out why is it that women aren't advancing at the same rate? Is it something in the culture? Is it something in the processes? Is it something in the leadership? And then how can we change this? So those are the sort of things I work on.
So those are actually perfect points, right? So there's a big problem attracting women. And I think a lot of companies sort of give lip service to it. We want to hire more women, but they don't really do anything to actively make that change.
Yeah.
And then I think, we also have companies that don't realize how horrible the attrition rate is for women in this industry and don't really look to see what they can do to keep them there. So all of those are excellent points. So what really prompted you to start with, gender diversity and get into this?
Well, I suppose I've always had an interest in women's issues. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I mean, I just as a child, I remember thinking it was unfair that the girls had to do knitting and the boys were doing woodwork. So there's always been that sort of observance in me or a connection to the topic. But I started working in it when it came to the UK, and I found that in the Netherlands, that where I'm from, it's really normal to work flexibly. So it's really easy to have a child, well, easier than in the UK, and then stay at a level in your career and work 4 days a week. Whereas in the UK, I found that all the flexible jobs, were just not at my level at all. And that somehow really frustrated me. I met all these other mothers at play groups, all sitting there with their babies, where I was sitting with my baby. And they'd all had amazing careers in the past. And now they were at home with their baby. And I mean, great if that's what you want. But a lot of them were actually quite keen to do more. And somehow that just, really frustrated me. I thought, oh, look at all this talent that is just not being used in the economy. Look at all these women not, fulfilling their dreams. What a shame, and that sort of prompted me to start. So I started working with women. And from that, moved into working with organizations when I realized that the solution is not with women, but with organizations.
And you bring up another really good point. As an industry, tech as a whole does kind of a not so great job of using tech to solve some of these problems. Remote work is a good example, flex hours, those kind of things, which I think some companies do a better job of than others. But you're right, it's definitely still an issue. So as you started doing all your research, what was kind of your biggest surprise?
Well, when basically I came across research into gender differences, and I found that personally really, really interesting. But all the research I came across was focused on, what it means for raising children, what it means for psychology and children with issues. So there was research on gender difference or what it means for your relationship, but it didn't really apply to work. And when I was reading through it, I thought, wow, this is so interesting because I need to find out what this means at work, if these gender differences are true. So I started trying to find that, and I couldn't really find a good book on gender difference at work. So I decided I had to write that. So I did research and wrote a book on men and women at work. It's called Be Gender Smart. And in my research for that book, what surprised me most, because that was your question, is how much all this applies to me, how much of I described 6 gender differences. And in 5 out of the 6, I am actually very female. Now, obviously, I am a woman, but I'd always worked in male-dominated environments. I've worked in Shell, in Siemens. I'm a mechanical engineer. I did business and engineering at university. So 70 to 80 to 90% of the teams I've worked in was then, 70, 80, 90% male, let's say. And I was that token woman. And that suited me. And I was just like the guys, I wasn't into shoes. I wasn't into fashion. I loved sort of doing, stuff with the guys. So I thought I was just a bit more male. And then when I did my research, I found out that actually, no, the way I work is very female. And that I didn't know that at all. I thought that was just my unique way of working. Turns out that half the population works like that.
So can you explain what those differences are?
Oh, well, there are 6, but I can give you an example. Because 6 would be taking 10 to go through. But basically, when I was working in Siemens on a project, and we were building a solution for a client, and at some point we were coming across one of these requirements, and this is before agile projects, right? So we were coming across one of these requirements in the team meeting, and they were all talking about it, saying, "Oh, well, this is going to take us at least 2 weeks to build, and it's like such a difficult requirement." So I was at the client side that day, and I said, "Gosh, this requirement, what exactly are you doing with it?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, it's really just a bit of a nice to have, like a bit like a counter in the top of the screen." So I went back to the development team and I said, "Look, this is what they need." And they said, yeah, but that's not what it says in the requirements. And then obviously you can sort of imagine that, oh gosh, if we want to change that, the contract has to be broken open and blah, blah, blah. And it was all very difficult. But I sort of pushed through. I went to the project manager and I said, "Look, why are we spending 2 weeks building something that really they don't need? This is what they need." Now, that the female way of working there is that women typically take decisions and look when they take decisions, look for the impact on people. Men are more inclined to base their decisions on data. So this is what's in the contract. So that's what we're going to build. And that sort of focus on people. What do the users need? And how can we make this work for the users? And actually also that comes with going to ask people. So that was all is a very female thing to do, rather than look at the contract, to go and actually ask people and think about the users.
When really, that's really where it should start.
Well, that's what everyone says. But reality is obviously what often happens, and I find that happens more in teams with just men, is that you start with asking them, and then it's all defined. And then you go down this rabbit hole where you're sort of working on something and you get engrossed in it and you get focused on what you're working on and what you're building. And it's all very exciting. And you sort of forget what it was for. And that is more usually happening in teams of men than if there were more women in the team. Women are more,
So you
that's
lose
to do with how men and women think differently. Women's brains typically are more developed to see connections between all kinds of things. So it's a sort of thing where you have a conversation about one thing, move to the next thing, come back to where you started. By that, if you hear 2 women talk, that is a really normal way to have a conversation. And my dad, if he would be listening to me and my sisters and we'd be talking like that, he got completely confused. So what are you talking about? There's like 5 different strands of the conversation. That's for women, it's much easier to combine all those things. And the same at work, you're sort of seeing already what's going to happen with the client, how it's going to end up in maintenance, what the issues were in the past, and sort of combining that all and seeing how that's going to impact the project today. Whereas men are more inclined to sort of focus on one thing at the time, one problem, let's focus on that and solve that. And it's just to do with how our brains work.
Yeah, and I can honestly say in my career that's been really true, whether it's intentional or not. It's more, I would say they're more focused, maybe, and women tend to be a bit more iterative and a little more acceptable where change is concerned, as opposed to, this is the 7 things that we're going to work on, and we're not going to work on anything else, even if those 7 things drag something else up that should be fixed. We're probably not going to pay as much attention to that because that's not on our official task list, if
No,
that
it's
makes sense.
interesting you recognize that. Yeah, and it's not, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, there is value in both, right? Because when you're combining all these things and you're looking at all these wider connections, it also means you may lose sight of priorities. You may get trapped in being sidetracked in all kinds of directions. So it's actually really good. I mean, I'm all for gender balance teams, right? 50-50, where you've got people who think about the priorities, who keep the focus, who remember you've got to keep a deadline and focus on one thing at the time, so you actually get something finished, right? So you need to have both in the team.
Oh, very much the yin and yang, as they say, right?
And I mean, also to be very clear here, some men will not recognize themselves in this. They'll think, oh, I'm like a woman. And the other way around, when the labels man and women are based on research, where sort of on average, women score slightly higher in this aspect than men do. But on average, so there's obviously a lot of women that score lower than a lot of men, because some men score above the average male, and so there is the labels are very loosely applied.
Well, and I mean, we're all products of our environment, right? So
exactly, yeah.
I think a lot of that is exposure, and part of it's how we're taught to work and who we're taught to work by, that has some influence there. So if you were going to give some advice to leaders that are, really keen to bring on women to the workforce and help them succeed, what would you recommend?
Well, yeah, gosh, I did so much work on this, but I mean, let me try and summarize that in some key tips. I think really important to realize that women aren't some sort of man, but then in a skirt or something, or with long hair, that actually they have grown up in a different environment. They have been shaped differently. So to sort of actually spend some time understanding your target group. If you want to recruit these different people, and I mean, this is not just true for women, right? This is true for any type of diversity. So if you want to recruit people from the Black African community, if you want to recruit people with different socioeconomic backgrounds, the same thing is true.
Sure.
Find out what is it that makes them tick. How do they talk about technology? How do they talk about what interests them in technology? Why would they want to work in technology? And what we're finding when we do that, and this may be different for your company and your specific industry, so you need to sort of have these conversations yourself. The big picture, what we're finding is that women, for instance, typically look at how can I apply this piece of technology and how is it helping society? So if, let's say, your data centers are great to improve sustainability, then talk about the sustainability and how you're improving sustainability. And that's more likely to attract women than talking about the sort of bits and bytes, or how fast your machines are and how quick it's handling data and how much bigger it is than someone else's. That is not the sort of, and I mean, I'm just sort of imagining the jobs here that you might be talking about. So talk about the impact on people, the impact on society. That's typically the type of thing that floats. That's the way women talk about technology more. And then also speak in their language. I mean, there is some really good apps out there. The gender decoder from Kat Matsfield is one, which actually is based on research done among groups of men and women, I believe in Canada or the United States, where they asked them to look at job adverts and just say which words attracted them and which words they just didn't really, that sort of, what's the opposite of attracting? Sorry, I can't find the word. Repelled them, let's say.
Yeah.
And so they they found that men and women have different words that trigger them. So you actually just run your job adverts through this little bit of software, and it tells you which words are more male coded and which words are more female coded. Then you still need to change it yourself. But it's very much the sort of thing where if you're looking for a confident leader who takes initiative and is the best of the best, those are all male coded words. So you need to then think of, okay, so what are we looking for? We're looking for a nurturing leader that can facilitate the team and support the team and bring together a lot of information. Those would be more female coded words. And I mean, you can lead the team in different ways, right? When you have a more nurturing, facilitative style, that can be a very effective leadership style. When you have a more commanding, visible leadership style, that can be very effective too.
Yeah, I read a study yesterday actually that talked about the difference, when you write a job application, that women will only apply if they think they meet 100% of the criteria that you lay out, whereas men will apply if they meet about 60% of that criteria. So I think, actually wording that where it means something is certainly part of it. And then I think too, we have to be really careful not to rely too much on machines to, go through our resumes and go through all of the people that have submitted, because in many cases they're coded by males. And it's been proven that artificial intelligence carries forward the exact same bias of whoever coded it to start with. So if we don't have that diversity and we don't bring in that difference of thought, or have, a female review the job application, for instance, to see if it, sounds appealing, or do some step to make sure that we have that inclusion, that we're probably going to exclude the very people that we want to include. And I think too, there's been studies on the number of jobs that are filled by networking versus, somebody applying off the street. And I think it's 85% are filled through networking. And typically we don't have a very mixed network. In a lot of cases, we have a very singular network, which brings about those same singular thoughts, right?
Yeah, so to respond to some of that, to check whether your adverts actually work for your target group, it works obviously really well to just run a couple of focus groups and see if your campaigns, the look and feel of your campaign, try it out. Then as to the number of criteria, that's a really good point. Typically what works in organizations, if you do have an advert, look at the 3 things you really, really can't teach someone in this job. What do they really need to have and are unmissable? Because apparently the less criteria you put down, the more likely it is that women actually respond. They think, oh, I take this, I take this, I take this. Yeah, I'm going to do that. So think about that, sort of reduce the number of criteria, what is absolutely essential. And about the machines, that's a really interesting one, because I've got a machine sorting people, because they got a lovely example of an engineering company that I worked with that said, we really, they're consulting engineers. So they build things in their lab and then they test things for clients. Like let's say they test hair dryers and see how hot can a bit of hair go before it breaks. So it's a very practical sort of engineering. And they said, we need people that are quite practical, so they look in CVs, they look for the people that currently work there, have experience with classical cars, or, they have hobbies that to do with steam engines, or, these sort of engineering boys type hobbies. Right. And the women that they've now hired, they found that they don't have these hobbies at all. So they said, well, how can we find out that? And they don't have that stuff in their CV, but they found they have like hobbies like arts and crafts. Or when you ask them, have you ever done anything practical with engineering? They go, oh yeah, I always help my dad building the shed. But it's not the sort of thing you put in your CV. So if you run that through a machine and said, look, these are the 25 people that work for us, and this is what their CV looked like, find us more of those. You would have never come across the sort of arts and crafts women or the women helping their dad building sheds. It's just but it's the same qualities, the same capabilities that you're building, the same interests that you have, and they can very well apply to testing hair dryers.
Yeah, that's really a great example. I think that in a lot of cases, women might be the first one to drop out because, they have to go home and be a caregiver. And degrees is one area that's really been noticed that women tend to not apply if they don't have their last semester, where, they may have been working because they, had the lowest pay. And so they dropped out of school faster and just started working. And,
Yeah.
So I think that, but it is an active process. Wouldn't you agree that if you really want to attract that diversity, it's not a passive thing that you do. It's a very active hunt, so to speak.
Yeah, it's starting that conversation. So change your networks. That was a good one you mentioned, right? So yeah, find out where those women are. 25 to 30% of people in STEM in universities is female. So find out, and they may be in biology, so go and look in biology, go and look in design. Where are they? And go and speak with them, or sort of see what works for them and who might be interested in working for you, starting the conversation, building those relationships. And then asking women, you've got to ask women as well, have you considered applying for us? Right?
Yeah. And, I think that some of the ideas of, careers that women can go into are taught at a very young age. And maybe that exposure isn't there where it really should be. And it would be nice if it was there.
Yeah, we find it often comes, and I mean, there's still research, it often comes at a different age for women. They may not be interested in Lego when they're 6, but they may be when they're 10. But that's when you, as parents, have already given up on giving them Lego, sort of thing.
Yeah, mostly because you don't want to step on them on the floor in the middle of the night.
That is very painful. It is.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for women that want to get ahead? If you could pick a few words of wisdom out to really help women in technical fields and male-dominated fields, what would you pick?
What I would have liked to be aware that those differences do exist and that it doesn't make you less. So the things that you do naturally, as in, the way I naturally would go, let's go and ask the users, or, gosh, this can be done simpler because if we combine this and this and this and this, why don't we do it like that? But you just don't really dare speaking up because no one else has said it. Well, that's because you may well have different experiences, a different way of thinking, and a different way of taking decisions than everyone else in the room who happens to be male. So to be aware of that and do bring, if you doubt something, if you feel there is something that you see that no one else sees, find a way to bring that in, even if you're quite young. Maybe you can say it after the meeting, or maybe there is a one-on-one opportunity, but make sure it is said, because other people don't see what you see. So that's the key one. And the other one is to actually then realize, what I would have liked to know as well, is that your way of working isn't your unique way of working. It's actually how probably a lot of other women work. And it's not some silly, unbusiness-like way of working. It's actually very effective, but it's very different from the people around you. So looking for how you work, how that is different from the people around you, and how that's bringing value, rather than trying to adapt to what they do and try to be more like them. Try and see how it brings value. And a lot of women will be like, yeah, that's just silly me. It's just how I do things. I do apologize. Okay, that's how you do things. It's not just how you do things. This is how you do things. And to be aware of that there is another way, that their way isn't necessarily the right way. Very valuable in its own right, but your way is very valuable in its own right too. And women often think, oh, well, my way is a bit silly. My way is really easy. That's just how I naturally do it. Well, exactly. But that is also very valuable.
Well, and I think too, as women, you get put down for doing it that way one time, and then you never want to do it again, even though really you should keep doing it and change the norm, as opposed to try to conform to the norm, because then you're not bringing that very diversity that you should be bringing to start with.
Yeah, in a team in BP, someone told me the man leading it was made diversity champion, and then he realized he didn't have any women in his team, so he needed to do something. So he ended up sort of doing some of the things I mentioned, having less criteria, thinking about how can you do this role without 25 years experience, because there weren't any women with those 25-year experience in oil and gas. So
Right.
he changed the role slightly so people with less experience could do it. Lots of women applied. He hired one. And the role was very much sort of checking the oil reserve levels that managers told them there were. So this is the amount of oil we still have in the reserves. And they were auditing that. But obviously, the lady who was new didn't have that experience, so she couldn't really audit it. So what she did, and I mean, he really learned from her, it was amazing. She would go before they submitted their numbers and say, look, these are the things we're after. And this is why we need those numbers. Do you need any help with putting that together? So basically, she jointly then made those reserve numbers with them. And that actually turned out to be much more effective than the policing style that they've been doing for years and years.
That makes really good sense. Yeah. I do think that in all cases, that diversity is really, really important. And, understanding that people do work differently is going to make us all better at the end of the day. So, with that, I just have to really thank you for your time today and your insight, and plug your book again.
Yeah, Be Gender Smart. It's called The Key to Career Success for Women. And I talk about the 6 key gender differences at work and how for leaders and managers, you can work better with women. And for women, how you can make sure you are valued at work.
Yeah. And, I think if as women, if we take some of that pressure off of ourselves to try to live up to every expectation we think people have of us and just be part of the process, we'll all be better off anyway. Certainly be a lot less stressful, I mean.
Yeah, and more valuable for the team. So in the end, I think then that works for everyone. And it also then gives man more permission to be a bit different, to do it their own way.
Yep.
Use their intuition more, for instance. That's a lot of men don't really dare doing that. Then women start doing it and men think, oh, can it be like that too? I'd love to do that. Yes, you can. So it opens up more ways of working for everyone.
And we all have something to learn. I mean, the day we quit learning, I think, is the day we stop breathing. So definitely room to grow on both sides, and certainly ways that we can help each other out. So thank you so much, Inge. This has been super informative, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, well, fabulous. It's been great fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.